Do you know who has access to what? This is the Identity at the Center podcast. If you're looking for identity and access management talk, you've come to the right place. And now, on to the show.
All right, welcome to another episode of Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff. I'm here with Jim in Seattle.
I'm Jim in Seattle.
You are Jim in Seattle. Today was the last day of the KuppingerCole Consumer Identity World Conference.
You said that better than anybody at the entire conference did.
I am a professional podcaster, so
yes.
And you can tell by my professional podcaster voice.
We should actually let everybody know we're using a snowball. I mean, this is the upper echelon of microphones, right?
No.
No.
I would say this is beginner hobbyist, but I like it because it's portable and it fits into a bag really well.
I don't want to start off as a complainer, but I'm going to. One of my biggest complaints at the conference this week was that people didn't hold the microphones up to their mouths, and they didn't have the speakers turned up very loud. So if you weren't sitting in the first couple of rows, you really couldn't hear what was being said. And there are a lot of quiet talkers. Mm-hmm. Quiet talker is fine, but hold the microphone up to your mouth.
Yeah. My favorite was one of the panelists and one of the things that we were at, where he's up on a panel, right? And he's talking and he's holding the microphone down by his legs.
At one point, he put the microphone in his lap to do hand motions.
Right, yeah.
I think you've already figured it out. I watched the Joe Rogan podcast, or I listen to it. Sometimes I watch it on YouTube, and he'll remind his guests, put the microphone to your mouth. Mm-hmm. I felt like doing that during some of the meetings, like, hello, hold the microphone to your mouth. Yeah. Anyway.
It's a nitpick.
It's a nitpick.
But it is something that once you see it, it's hard to unsee, right? Or unhear in this case.
Yeah. I didn't hear everything, but I heard enough.
You heard enough.
To kind of summarize. So first off, this was not a tech conference. It wasn't, there were a lot of like code examples shown, REST APIs, things like that during the conference. So I got to geek out a little bit, but for the most part, I thought the three major themes were privacy, consent, and data breaches, and what to do, what to do in the course of a data breach, a lot of privacy regulations that are coming down the pipe, how they're affecting consumer IAM, and then how to handle consent and what's the right approach.
Right. The conversation focusing around GDPR, PSD2, or PDS2. It's the banking directive in European Union, and then the California Privacy Protection Act. So I think there was a lot of questions around, what does it mean for companies now that we've kind of gotten past this first part of, okay, now it's in place, now what, right? There's been some breaches, which means there's been some fines. Now it's how do we address it more proactively than just the kind of the mad scramble that's been around for the last couple of years, just to like, okay, yeah, we're compliant. What does that mean though?
Right. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Somebody asked, what are the benefits that have come from GDPR? And I know there have been some fines already totaling, I think, less than €1 billion, but imagine the amount that consulting firms and law firms have made already on this regulation. And as the thing ramps up and fines get heavier and more, there's the higher quantity of fines. Mm-hmm. It's just like Sarbanes-Oxley. Yeah. I think that was like the best thing to ever happen. I think that was what Louis said on our podcast, a couple of months ago, was Sarbanes-Oxley was the best thing to ever happen to IAM.
Yeah, definitely, because you have to be able to prove it, right? And I think GDPR is gonna be a lot more driving that same type of behavior, because it's not a static fine, right? It's a percentage of revenue,
right?
Which, if you're a huge company, Google, Microsoft, whatever it may be, you're not getting away with just kind of a standard fine that is the same no matter what size you are. So it can be pretty expensive. The British Airways one, I think, was $500 million or something like that.
Right.
And that was just one of the first ones. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of fear that puts into companies to say, okay, are we treating privacy correctly, the consent, and being able to manage the customer data in a way that protects them and mitigates any risk.
I didn't write her name down, but there's a woman from Salesforce who was talking about
Marla.
Marla, right? Talking about GDPR and talking about the intent versus the letter of the law. And in other words, are companies trying to implement around the spirit of GDPR or just be compliant, just to check the box?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the bigger danger. You know, a lot of the people in our industry that I've met over time, they really want to get in alignment with the spirit. At the same time, they know they need to check all the boxes.
Yeah.
But I really do think the spirit is heading in the right direction. I think it being limited in certain ways in terms of its scope, not being a global directive, not having something that's, you know, pretty much equal with it in the United States and other major economies, I think is where it's going to miss. And hopefully, you know, coming from my perspective, hopefully this is something that gets driven down a lot more. I think from a company perspective, you know, they need solutions to GDPR to be productized.
Mm-hmm.
They can't solve all these problems themselves. They need, and this is, you know, it's initiatives like this and complexity like this that will drive adoption of cloud solutions if they can meet the use case requirements that the company has in terms of the core functionality. They just don't want to have to take on the complexity of something like becoming compliant with privacy regulations.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think most companies struggle with, from a financial perspective, they have to start somewhere. They don't have the luxury of going in and saying, let's build the ideal state.
Right.
This is the way the state is today, meaning our current environment, our current business processes. They have to start almost with the checkbox compliance because that's the minimum viable product that they can put out. Would they like to design ideally? Yes, probably. But there's very few companies that, one, have the funding to do that right away, or the corporate desire or organizational desire to do it. So I see it as a stepping stone, right? It was, okay, let's get the basics in place. Now let's start to expand from there. Right. Versus, you know, a product that maybe goes into it with, you know, a product or a company or service that goes into it with security design first, which you are starting to see more of those, but not enough, I don't think.
Right.
You know, I think of several services that I use that are, you know, Web 2.0 and later products that still don't support MFA.
Yeah. I think you've actually are starting to reach a groundswell where people expect two-factor. I don't know, you know, part of it is I feel like being in this industry, I lose touch with the common man.
Yeah.
You know, I would not bank at a bank that did not have two-factor.
Mm-hmm. I
just wouldn't do it. If I didn't feel like there was sufficient security around my account, I wouldn't bank there. With the average Joe on the street, I don't know. Every time I tell people, like I was saying the last podcast, I'm very social. I like to, you know, I like to talk to everyone. I'll talk to folks sitting next to me on the airplane, and invariably they'll want to know what I do, and I try to explain it within a context that I think they'll understand, and usually I explain it as username and password. I hate passwords.
Do they put their earphones in? Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. No, it's even worse. Before they do that, I get the diatribe about how they hate changing their password.
Yeah.
I hate all these password standards. You know who does it best? There's one company where they don't even ask for a password. They just recognize your phone, and it's two-factor because it's you and the phone. Okay.
Whatever makes you happy.
Whatever makes you happy. And, you know, if you want your 401k funds and your entire financial future dependent on lax security policies, that's up to you. So, no, but I thought, you know, there's some really good conversation around consent. You know, the whole user managed access or UMA standard. I think, you know, we didn't talk too much about adoption and how far it's gotten in terms of adoption. It seems like, you know, Alan Foster gave the talk, and I remember Eve Mangler, who has really been spearheading the UMA standard for as long as I've heard of it. I guess it's been around a lot longer than I was aware of it, but I've been aware of it since maybe 13 or 14. And
before we get too far, what is UMA?
UMA, user managed access. So the idea is that a user would be able to control who gets access to their data. The use case example that is often given is in the healthcare industry. If you wanted to give somebody enough access that they could look at some records or be able to pick up certain prescriptions for you, but not just black and white. Either you can see everything or you can see nothing.
So more at like the entitlement or individual data level than at the account level.
Right. It's an entitlement level. It's a way to permit people to have just certain access, not others, and also a whole ecosystem around granting, but also being able to revoke, seeing what access you've granted to who, and changing that list at any time, having receipts for having granted the access. So it's a well thought out strategy.
It sounds an awful lot like blockchain, or what blockchain promises.
Yeah.
Receipts, individual access, you control it, self-sovereign identity, those types of things.
Right.
And just throwing out there, it's probably not a topic for right now.
Right.
Because again, there was another blockchain system. I'm waiting for someone to productize it because I don't think it makes sense to build it on it yet. So what's the right, at least for an organization to adopt, right? Most organizations aren't going to build their own blockchain. They're waiting for a product and a use case that it matches up with.
Right.
I understand the draw of UMA, and it makes sense. But again, I think it's a very specific use case. Until everyone is on board with that, it needs more backing behind it. The school records, medical records, things like that make total sense. But are hospitals using UMA today?
So I feel like if large industry organizations jump on it and say, this is how you get in compliance with HIPAA, or this is what we really support, and we're going to pile some money and pile some resources into this. I have always felt like that was really what will help UMA get over the hump. And if you see one industry go all in on it, like healthcare, then you'll see other industries do the same potentially.
You see somebody like Epic or Cerner, they would drive the UMA adoption through their software products, which are primarily used in medical, right?
That's right.
But who makes that product decision? Is it the hospital asking for it?
You see, this is why I feel like it's got to be at an industry level. I don't feel like if one company drives it, then you're going to have mass adoption. I really feel like it, for UMA to really take off, it really requires cooperation across multiple platforms within an industry IT footprint. So, but from a consent standpoint, UMA was definitely there. It was definitely discussed. Also, we were just talking about consent in terms of your application. When you're collecting data about users, the right thing to do, and this isn't really driven by any standards other than the way we'd want to be treated, is letting people know why we're collecting the data, how it's going to be used, and your rights in terms of taking that data away. Now, what the discussion kind of went to was like, okay, now you're seeing with GDPR, every website you go to, they pop up some kind of modal saying we use cookies, and you need to accept our privacy policy before you move forward, or by clicking OK, you accept our privacy policy. And so it becomes, and you get hit with so many of these, you just want it to get off the screen.
It's like
right?
the EULA, right? Everyone clicks just, sure, go ahead and install it, whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's the part of that is what's happening. I think there's also kind of an injustice in that, if you don't really have a choice, like if your electric company says you need to accept this, you only have one choice for the electric company. If you want electric, you have to agree to their privacy policy. That is not fair, I guess, but it is the way it is.
So whose fault is that, though? Is it the consumer not being more aware of these types of issues, which, let's be honest, right, IAM is still niche, right? It's not something that people think about on a daily basis. Or is it the job of whatever good or service that the person is accessing to communicate that?
Yeah.
It's probably both, right? I mean, it's like
both.
if you're an educated consumer, you want to know where your things are going and whatever, and what your, how your data is being used. But does the common person really care? They just want to go to their website.
Right. Well, I think they would care. I think people care about things when it really hits home.
Right.
I think this is one of those issues where, people probably don't care, but we saw some examples where a privacy policy at one point said, is very basic, like we're going to collect your data and we won't give it to anybody. Then they changed the privacy policy to say, we may share your data with third parties. Which means what?
Right, yeah. Who, what?
Third parties means anybody else.
Right.
We can give your data to anybody. Now, you can say, you can go out to Microsoft, and I'm not sure if it was Microsoft, but you can go out to this service and cancel your account after you've invested whatever
right.
amount of energy.
You're in the ecosystem, and now you're stuck.
I get emails from, say, PayPal. We've changed our privacy policy.
Right.
Well, first off, so am I going to go out there and read the privacy policy like 3 times a year every time they change it?
Right.
Then am I going to cancel my account when it is really become like a utility in a lot of ways? I need it in order to make certain payments.
Birthright access for a human. A personal email address, right? I mean,
well, we have the idea of utilities, water, electric, and I don't think they were considered utilities at one point. They were considered services.
Right. They get classified by whatever government agency. And
at some point along the way, it's like, well, everybody needs this. And we've thought, you hear the conversation in public policy today, like internet is like almost like a basic human right. Healthcare is a basic human right. Okay. Whether or not you agree with that, it's getting to the point where it's pretty hard to live without healthcare. It's pretty hard to live without internet. So do you have, and it's certainly hard to live without using ATMs or PayPal. And if you want to use those services, does that mean that it's okay for the company to sell your data to whoever they feel like it?
The hard part I have with it is, in addition to everything you just said, is how hard they make it to opt out. Right? They'll send you a thing and say, by using this, you continue to agree. If you don't want to do this, go write a letter, right? Or print this form out. And there's no electronic way sometimes to opt out of things. You literally have to go back to pen and paper and a stamp and mail something to somewhere to opt out, right?
Self-addressed stamp.
Right, yeah. They make it really hard to not go along with their service. And sure, yeah, you can move services, but yeah, there's an investment, there's an ecosystem you get locked into. It's difficult to make that change sometimes.
Someone brought up during one of their presentations around how many robocalls people are getting. And
the average, so many today.
The average American is getting 150 a year. And I was sitting there thinking, so it's not just me.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, did I click on something stupid? Did I fill out some form somewhere and put my number in? Maybe the answer is yes, but apparently everybody does that. But I get these like text messages now, like, man lives for 150 years by eating this one root, and then there's a link. And I'm like,
wait, can you send me that link? That sounds interesting.
I'm not clicking that stupid link because you click that thing, it's going to say we've got a real phone number. Yeah, it's got some token in the URL. They're going to say, all right, that phone number is real. We should send more junk that way.
The only answer is to just get off the internet, cancel your phone service.
Well, I kind of remember back before the internet, there was the idea that you could be on a do not call list.
Yeah, it still exists, but
nobody cares anymore, right?
Yeah, there's so many. Does it work or does it not work? You have to opt into it every, 3 or 5 years? And then you've got like the Direct Marketers Association where it costs a fee to get taken off their list.
Right.
I mean, this is the thing. Again, it's too hard to opt out. these are not consumer-friendly practices, which if you're in a consumer identity access management conference, this is why these types of things come up. From the UI perspective and the user experience perspective of being able to easily come and go from the service.
Right. Yeah, for each IM conference, there's probably 3 conferences on how to send this junk mail to people.
Yeah. And the conferences are guilty too, right? We're going to get junk mail now from, each of the conferences that we go to, because now we're a lead and we've attended something. So now we're going to get emails. Hey, guess what? It's September next year, make sure that you come out to this conference.
I know, by the way, we gave your information to third parties.
Right, to the vendors who were in there.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about the data breach stuff. I mean, there's a lot of discussion around that over the past 2 days. That British Airways data breach, that's something that I'm going to dig into further. They got nailed with a GDPR fine because of that data breach, but also I was aware of it, but it didn't really register to me as one that was as major as apparently it is. So that's one I've got to dig into further. And then we had a meeting today where there was a presentation from someone from the FBI.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool. What were your
That was
thoughts?
my favorite.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always cool to have spy agencies, right? And, presenting, et cetera. Guy's name was Nathan. He's part of the cyber task force, whatever it is, here in Seattle. And really his presentation was around why you want to partner with the FBI, which, there's always some hesitancy of working with the government on anything, I think. But I thought it was good. And it was definitely one of the ones that I was certainly paying a lot of attention to and just listening to the message she was putting out there.
And to recap, one of the questions that I asked, first question I asked was around, so say you had one of your systems hacked and it was a financial system, you called the FBI, gave them the data, and the IRS asked them, hey, could we have that data
Sharing
as well?
the data between the FBI
Sharing
and
the
the IRS.
data and other agencies. Mm-hmm. And he said that would not happen.
Yeah.
And then the second one was if they discovered another crime in the course of going through your system. So, I used kind of it could even be an accidental crime, mm-hmm. like not paying export tariffs or mm-hmm. something like that. Mm-hmm. And he said, I don't think his answer was as black and white,
no.
But that
they would inform the company.
Hey,
there is a crime here. And then the expectation is sounded is that you would then inform the appropriate authority that, hey, a crime has been committed.
Right.
But it didn't leave out the fact that I'm sure there are provisions where if there is a crime that's been committed, the FBI can forward that tip to someone else.
I would say that, at that point, you probably, my thinking here as a practitioner would be, one of the main things we need to do is put together a data breach plan. So mm-hmm. in other words, if your company gets breached,
not if,
here's what,
when
your company gets breached, this is what you're going to do.
Yep.
Here are the players, things like that. I think you need to circulate that within your company. And part of it needs to be when you get law enforcement involved, mm-hmm. who you contact, things like that. And in terms of reviewing the plan, one of the teams needs to be your legal team. And I'd even go to the extent to say, do you have concerns that with the information that we may hand over, they may,
That's why you have lawyers,
hand over
data, legal
right?
departments, et cetera. Yeah. I think it is a good idea though to have a relationship with the FBI, for example.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing that you're sharing information. One of the companies I used to work for in the past, they would have a quarterly meeting with local law enforcement, police, FBI, CIA, whoever it was, would get together and just share information, say, here's what we're seeing, here's some things to keep an eye out for, et cetera. And that was pretty much it, right? At least you knew kind of the people in the area and you would know where to go to for help, et cetera. And then you can ultimately decide, someone's gonna make a decision of, okay, do we share this specific incident with the FBI or not?
Right.
And I would think in most cases that are consumer facing, because of the consumer aspect of it, that there's probably at some point there's going to have to be some sort of involvement by some law enforcement to be able to prosecute or to recover damages or whatever it may be from whatever the entity is.
I feel like you have a lot more to gain from a relationship with the FBI than to lose, because hopefully you're not committing crimes, right?
Yeah. Let's just assume that most people are running up and up.
You're not committing crimes. I mean, the example I brought up was maybe an accidental crime, but let's assume that you have more to gain than to lose.
Right.
So
I think that would apply for most folks.
Yeah.
I asked them about deepfakes.
Yes, you asked about the deepfakes,
which is something that I find very fascinating, mostly for meme usage, but I'm sure there's already cases of fraud taking place with the deepfake process. And I read recently that the creator of deepfakes thinks that in roughly 6 months or so, they're going to be virtually indistinguishable from a deepfake video versus being able to determine it's a deepfake video, which is kind of scary if you think about it, because now when you start to think about things like biometrics that are using voice prints, even that can be deepfake. There was recently a bank transfer done that the CEO, their voice was deepfaked. They called someone, I'm doing in quotation marks that you can't see, and money was transferred because it was just a simple tribal knowledge of, oh yeah, that's what Jim sounds like. So yeah, let me go ahead and send this $100,000 to this bank account.
Right.
Socially engineered with the aid of a deep-faked voice print. Going forward, what does video look like, audio look like, et cetera? And he admitted that they're really kind of behind the curve on that. It's difficult to track. That's something that came up in our Black Hat podcast that we did a while back, but that was one of the sessions that I thought was interesting. And, there are companies that are trying to figure out ways to identify those, but he admitted, that from his perspective, at least, that there's more that needs to be done and that it is a difficult task to try and identify.
I felt like he answered your question in two parts. One was around just how difficult it is, what you were just addressing. The other was, is it a crime to commit to create these deep fakes? So, if you create a deep fake video of
let's say Fletcher, right? Dressed as Gritty.
Yeah. And so if you do a deep fake of a celebrity and, make them look stupid and then publish that, have you committed a crime? Or where does it become a crime? Like, let's just take it to a totally different type of crime. If you have a chop shop, in other words, like a place to bring stolen cars, where you're going to break them down into parts and then ship them out, is that a crime? No. The crime is committed when you bring the car there and you bring the stolen property on. Or I guess there could be a conspiracy to commit a crime.
Right.
But either way, you'd have to prove it. So I don't think just creating deep fakes
by itself, it's not a thing, but it's a tool, another tool that can be used against an organization.
I was going to ask Nathan the question of kind of what authority they act under with cybercrimes, because he even mentioned at one point, was a federal crime committed? In other words, like if it was a local crime, FBI doesn't have jurisdiction. I think the FBI operates a lot with the Interstate Commerce Clause.
Well, it's also Title 18 too, which is computer fraud. That's pretty broad.
Okay.
He didn't go into a lot of detail with it, but most likely it's Title 18 that they'll get you, which is pretty broadly stated as if you use the computer to do something bad.
Right.
They call it hacking, right? But he even said he didn't like that term as much, but that's just what people know it is.
I think if you're doing any kind of computer crime, you're probably crossing state lines at some point anyway, making it a federal offense.
Yeah. I don't want to turn this into a legal podcast because
Jim
and Jeff told me this was okay. So
Jim and Jeff don't know what they're talking about.
Right. Yeah.
That's our disclaimer. We have no idea what we're talking about.
Right. But overall, I think the conference was a lot smaller than I thought it would be. And in our first version of this podcast that we recorded, I was probably a little bit more down on it, but I thought the content was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
I was turned off initially by just, there's nobody here.
Right.
And what it turned into, there was actual discussion taking place in these sessions, which is not something that you normally see. And good, thoughtful kind of discussion around what about this type of scenario, that type of scenario, how would we handle this type of thing, et cetera. So I thought that was, for the most part, the sessions themselves were good.
Right. I had two my first recommendation is if you're in Seattle or driving distance to Seattle, this is a great conference to go to next year. And I think a lot of people at the conference were local.
Yeah, it seems like about half to a third maybe.
From at least West Coast people.
Yeah.
Then there were folks who were coming in from Europe and maybe they just, they really enjoyed KC conferences. Mm-hmm. My recommendations were two. One was if you're going to have all this German food, you should have German beer.
Yep.
And number two was to try to schedule it so that it's in the same city and close in dates to another conference. One of the things I like to do is try to hit two conferences in the same city, kind of like go from one to the next. And, especially if you're flying, it just really brings the cost down.
Yeah, well, I think from a management perspective and having done this for years, it's a lot easier to justify, hey, we're going to spend an extra day, but we're also going to hit this other conference.
Right, exactly.
So if there's a way to do, Black Hat does this. So Black Hat is typically like Sunday through Thursday. And then DEF CON is Friday to Sunday. Yeah. So most people will go to Vegas for an entire week and hit both conferences.
Yeah.
There's a IM vendor that is doing the same thing with Gartner later this year. So their conference days are Sunday, Monday, and the Gartner IM conference is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
And
really smart.
Providing coverage of those.
Yes, Jim and I will be at both of those events. So I'm sure we will have podcasts and some guests maybe from around there.
Stay tuned, tell your friends.
That's right, exactly. But yeah, I think this was a good conference. It's a young conference. It's only been around, this is its third year. It shows. But I think as more people become aware of it, that it's poised to grow as well. But the content itself, which is really what you're looking for, I think it was good.
Right. Yeah, we don't want KC to give up on the conference. We want to keep pushing it and maybe try and tweak some things so that more people can, like the whole idea of scheduling it to bump up with something else.
Yeah.
Or, another idea I didn't put out there, but, they cover not only, so this was consumer IM world. Mm-hmm. They also cover other areas of IM and other areas of AI and everything. Just have all those conferences together in one place and get more people there and allow people to switch tracks and things like that. Plus, so let's say you had 4 different areas that were covered. So internal IM, consumer IM, InfoSec, and AI. And you pulled in 300, 400 people. Mm-hmm. Then you can get a keynote speaker of somebody who's an industry expert or somebody who's completely outside the industry who's like, a higher level speaker. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's one of the great takeaways from any conferences. You get a keynote from somebody who's, outside of your industry, just gives you a different way to look at things.
Like Bill Nye at the Gartner Catalyst Conference, 5 years ago. Bill Nye, the science guy.
Yeah.
It was it's not really an identity conference, but it's sort of like here's what's next from a security perspective. And, Gartner got Bill Nye to be the closing speaker. I had a great time with it.
Yeah.
Dane and I were there. Dane got a selfie with him. I took a far away selfie with him. So, nice. But it was kind of cool. And it was a great experience, listening to him talk, and he's funny, he's entertaining, et cetera. Yeah. But, his ideas gelled really well with the conference message.
Right. Yeah. And you have to have a certain number of people coming to the conference in order to justify that.
It can be expensive.
It can be really expensive.
Yeah. So how did you do with your conference attendance strategy? We talked about it a couple days ago, kind of like going into it with Jamie. Did you hit the tracks that you wanted to hit? Did you do everything you were looking to do?
So what I did was I hit the AI track. So, we also talked about doing customer calls and work calls. And I did wind up getting sucked into more of that than I wanted. But I still felt like I made I gave it a good go, and I attended the majority of each of the last 2 days. Mm-hmm. I went kind of outside of my lane and tried to do the sessions that were things I don't think about all the time. I didn't sit in the authentication session. I mean, I've been thinking about authentication for 15 years straight. So I did the AI, I did a lot around consent and privacy. And I think I made the right choice anyway. I mean, I would have loved to have been in the other meetings as well, but that really wasn't an option.
Right. We can always download the slides or whatever from.
Hopefully, yeah. And how about you?
I feel like I was inconsistent. First day went well. Second day, just had a ton of meetings and responsibilities that I had to do. But I think that's part of juggling, being able to justify attendance that doesn't take away too much from, the day job. But I think today then, I was able to spend roughly half the day at the conference outside of, customer calls and dealing with different, issues that tend to pop up as last minute. But I think it did okay. And I certainly made an effort to sit more on the GDPR side of things so that I could see what some of the struggles were around that, since that's not something that we typically get as much exposure on the US side. So I think I would give myself a B, I would say.
What did you think of the scheduling of the conference? So it was all day Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I mean, all day Friday, like the conference ended at 4:30 Pacific on Friday.
Yeah, it's a little abnormal to go full day on the last day because it limits flights back for a lot of people who like to
basically
leave.
If you want to fly back tonight, you had to do a red eye
or skip part of the conference.
Or skip a lot of the conference.
I thought it was okay. I think if you plan around it, it is what it is. I would have, I don't know if I have an opinion either way. Now it gives me a night in Seattle where I can, walk around, which is a great city, and, do some sightseeing or do whatever I want to do, or most likely get buried in email catching up from the week. But that's okay. I mean, that's fine with me.
Yeah. I think that, if they were to redo it, they'd be better off ending it at the end of the day Thursday or half day Friday.
Yeah. Do something like a Tuesday through Thursday. Yeah. But it is what it is.
Right.
I'm not going to.
Or Monday afternoon through end of day Wednesday.
Or maybe just do it Friday and Saturday. And then
there you go.
We only have 7 days. So there's going to be a certain number of combinations.
Yeah.
I will say, though, that one of the things that you absolutely have to do, though, is bring back those potato chips.
Yeah, I didn't get any of those to go.
Yeah.
And they had these, you didn't have the soft pretzels, did you?
No.
I tried not to eat 500 grams of carbs today, but when I was here, I did. And those Bavarian soft pretzels were ridiculous.
There was like a cheese sauce, too, or something with them, too, right?
They had a cheese sauce. They did not have beer. If they had beer, I probably would have just sat there and did a Homer Simpson, ate 5 pretzels and drank 3 beers.
No one would have been awake for the final meetings.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's probably a pretty good way to leave it. Overall, I think it was a good conference. Go for the chips, stay for the content. And since this was a 2-parter, we'll figure out, I think, how we hear this out. But if you're listening to this part, you've already heard the first part.
You know everything you need to know.
Right. So we'll be talking to you down the road, and thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. To access all episodes, visit identityatthecenter.com.